If you've played Warzone 2, you've probably seen this before. Servers that seemingly spike into 999 milliseconds worth of ping, end up lagging all over the place, and end up timing out a number of players. This is a great example of it, a duos game I loaded into where we went from 150 players to 100 and below simply because the server decided to die. Server crashes in video games aren't uncommon, but Call of Duty is a unique case because Warzone 2 has probably some of the worst server stability I think I've seen in any first-person shooter. So I decided to run some testing to see what exactly was going on with Warzone 2 servers. And the results are pretty horrible, because not only does Warzone 2 have some of the worst servers for a first-person shooter, the massive instability being caused, which has been present since launch, is a fundamental design flaw in the game and the networking that's been provided. To make this video understandable for people who aren't networking professionals, there's a couple of things that we need to explain first. Now, Call of Duty Warzone 2, like most other first-person shooters and battle royales, use a dedicated server, and these servers receive and send critical information about what happens in-game. Things like character movement, the position of your character, movement of vehicles, firing your weapon and hitting targets. You as an individual player send information to the server sends information back to you, and what happens in-game on your screen at home should be a rough reflection of what has occurred in the game server. And when you run into another player, the server is responsible for determining the outcomes of what happens. So when you have a gunfight with another player, when one of you gets more headshots and the other one gets leg shots, who should win that gunfight? Who dealt more damage? Whose shots registered where? So on and so forth. You can think of the game server as effectively a ledger for what is actually happening in the game. And because of this ledger of information, this is why there are sometimes mismatches or discrepancies between what you think you've seen and what has actually taken place in the game server. So for example, if you've ever had an instance where it looks like you've been killed behind cover, or you were firing on an opponent and your shots didn't register, it's because something is going wrong that's causing a mismatch between your client and the actual game server. And the two greatest contributing factors to the mismatch between what you see on your screen and what actually takes place in the server is your ping or latency, and also the server tick rate. Now, the ping or latency refers to the amount of time it takes for you to send information to the server and the server to send that information back to you. It's a full round trip, if you will. The longer that round trip takes, the more delayed the information is getting to the server, then getting back to you, and the bigger the difference between what happens in the server and what appears to happen in your game is. Server tick rate refers to the amount of times per second a server actually updates and sends and receives information. The higher the performance of the server and the higher the tick rate, the lower the delay in terms of reading and sending information, and the more accurate what happens in the server and what happens in your game is. So you can think of it as a two-way system, where you as a player need to have a decent connection to the game server in terms of your distance to it and your general internet connection and stability, and the game server actually needs to be fast enough and update frequently enough to process that information. If either of those two things go colossally wrong, you get bad hit detection, you get gunfights that just don't make sense, you get killed behind cover, and all of the general issues with latency start to bleed into your gameplay. So effectively, you want the lowest amount of latency with the highest amount of server performance, to give you a really good representation of what's happening in the game. This is a chart by a YouTuber called Battle Nonsense, who historically has measured the actual latency and server tick rate to see how much of a delay there is between two players, and see how many problems can take place in a game. For example, how long does it take one player in your game server to see your character moving, firing their weapon, or sending or receiving damage? And you can see that certain games like Valorant and CSGO have really high server tick rates to reduce the amount of delay between these actions as much as humanly possible, and give you an accurate and competitive representation of what is happening in your game. And the keen-eyed among you might realize from these charts that Call of Duty historically has had some of the lowest server update rates or tick rates in general FPS titles, resulting in the most amount of delay and general performance problems. To make matters clear in very simple terms, The times you die behind cover, the times where your shots don't register, and the times where things just don't accurately make sense are statistically much more likely in Call of Duty because they have some of the worst servers. Having low update servers also causes another huge problem in video games called super bullets, which you've definitely experienced in Call of Duty. Super bullets are when a server sends all of its information in one hit, rather than sending it in the fast updates that it's supposed to, resulting in you receiving damage all in one go. So if it's ever felt like you've died instantly to a weapon like a fire shotgun or dual pistols in Warzone 2, that's because this is what's occurring. If you think of the server tick rate as a camera and the game as a really fast car, if your camera only takes 20 photos per second and a really fast car goes past, chances are most of those pictures are going to be blurry, and you're not going to get accurate information on what the car looks like. But if your camera or server updates with 60 photos per second, then chances are you're going to get much cleaner images that are less blurry and more accurately show you information of what's going on. And super bullets are that blurry image. It's when something happens in the game so quickly that the server itself cannot register the information in time and sends it all at a different time. And when it groups up all of that information and sends it in one hit, you get instances where the damage from a certain weapon is sent all in one single information packet, meaning that you literally go from maximum health and armor to 0 in a single update. And here is a good image from Battle Nonsense explaining that. When certain guns with certain rates of fire or certain amounts of damage fire in between the gaps of server updates, you end up getting messy outcomes in your game where people die instantly. With all of this information in mind, what ping and latency is, what a server tick rate is, what exactly is going wrong in Warzone 2, and why is it among the worst for first-person shooters in the gaming industry? On screen right now is my ping to major popular titles: CSGO, Valorant, Apex Legends, Rainbow Six Siege, and then an assortment of Call of Duty pings. We have Call of Duty regular 6v6, Call of Duty Mini Royale, which is capped to 50 odd players, Ashika Island, which we know is a lower player count, and then Al Mazrah, which is 150 odd players and the highest player count mode in Warzone 2. The keen-eyed among you may have already realized that Al Mazrah with 150 players has the highest amount of ping. And this actually tells a really troubling story with what's going on in Warzone 2 servers. When I mentioned ping/latency and server tick rates earlier, that is assuming that your server is running normally and optimally at all times, and there's nothing happening in the game server that is creating demand or putting strain on the game server to send and receive information. The problem with that is when you throw 150 players at a game server, problems start occurring. Because every single one of those 150 players has a physics value. They can all send ballistic data from the weapons they fire, which has to be calculated by the server. They can all blow up vehicles, move vehicles, and fly around, which has to be calculated by the server. They all can call in airstrikes to damage other opponents, which has to be calculated by the server. And also, the game server has to spawn in artificial intelligence to protect strongholds and protect the black site, which also has to be calculated by the game server. The CPU inside this game server is in charge of the calculation of every single bit of data that you throw at the game. Every gunshot you fire, every movement you make, every piece of AI that spawns on the map, every airstrike, every kill streak, and everything that incurs a physical value. And there are things that incur physical values that you don't even realize. When artificial intelligence spawns on the server, they all spawn in on helicopters, and those helicopters can be destroyed because they have a physics value. So that all has to be calculated. And whilst juggling these calculations, the server has to maintain high enough performance to maintain its tick rate, and send and receive those updates to make sure it's sending and receiving the most accurate information. And here is where the trouble begins for Warzone 2. The default latency for Warzone 2 is automatically quite high for most people, because the game servers at a basic level struggle to accommodate 150 players. But it gets worse. When the artificial intelligence spawns on Al Mazrah and strongholds and black sites go active, I noticed on average in every single game that the ping in the game server would jump by about 10 to 20 milliseconds, implying that the server tick rate was getting worse and the server quality was degrading because it suddenly had the extra strain of calculating everything going on with the artificial intelligence. And bearing in mind, the AI spawns in once and then continues to spawn in whenever somebody is in proximity to one of those locations. And then at the same time, if things like airstrikes are occurring, vehicle explosions are detonating, so on and so forth, there is a window of time where you have over 100 players alive, give or take, and a large amount of artificial intelligence, including kill streaks and other server calculations, where the server quality can degrade by up to 30 milliseconds worth of ping, implying that the server tick rate, which is a lowly 20 Hz to begin with, is starting to struggle to maintain 20 Hz. And it also means that there is a window of time where a number of players are alive, where artificial intelligence is spawning, and where other physics events like kill streaks are occurring, where the game server can just crash, because it simply is being overwhelmed by the demand of processes that it has to calculate. And this is why you often get the lag spikes of 999 milliseconds in the first third of the game or in the pre-game lobby, because it's the period of time where server demand is at its maximum. And it's also the period of time where you're most likely to see the most amount of rubber banding. And the interesting part about this is that you can actually compare and contrast all of the modes in Warzone. Now yes, servers in Ashika Island do die, and every once in a while servers will just fail regardless of how the game is working or how it's coding. But servers in Ashika Island statistically crash, in my opinion, much less, and have much less issues with rubber banding or 999 millisecond ping examples. And you can even compare Al Mazrah to Al Mazrah, because in a mini royale game, the server latency is around 10 to 20 milliseconds lower because there are less players and no artificial intelligence in this game mode. And you can even compare a single round to itself, because for the most part, when you get to the last 30 to 40 players in Warzone 2, in the final circles where AI has been despawned from the map, assuming the server hasn't already destroyed itself, you actually see the overall latency drop by about 20 to 10 milliseconds again. Once again implying that the performance of the server is picking back up because there's less strain on it. So not only are 20 Hz servers extremely bad for Warzone 2, you also have the fact that the server probably isn't even maintaining 20 Hz for most of the time, because it's struggling with the calculations taking place between 150 players, and on top of that is struggling with the workload being thrown at it from artificial intelligence in the game, which it also has to calculate things for. And then on top of that, to make matters worse, Call of Duty Warzone 2 has extreme skill-based matchmaking, meaning that it doesn't care about your initial latency when it matchmakes you into a game. It would rather you be in a lobby which matches your skill rating than be in a lobby which offers you the best connection. And when multiple people with high amounts of latency to a server are in an unreliable and unstable environment, none of the gunfights in the game are ever going to be fair or accurate. They're all going to be a mess. And what's interesting about all of these problems is that these are historical problems as well. Here are some charts again from Battle Nonsense, from the Call of Duty Cold War beta, and similar charts were seen and shown in Modern Warfare 2019's Ground War mode. And these are charts showing packet burst, where the game server and the game client are sending chunks of information in short bursts and spiking, causing information processing problems between the client and the server, creating some of those mismatches we were talking about earlier. And it shows that in large player modes like Dirty Bomb and Ground War, this has been a historical problem, where the Call of Duty engine, or parts of it amongst different Call of Duty titles, including the IW8 engine, has struggled with sending and receiving information when large numbers of players are involved. So to summarize, Warzone 2 has 20 Hz servers, which is extremely bad. And based on the ping that we have seen in the various different modes in Warzone and Modern Warfare 2, we can infer from this data that things like artificial intelligence and the general number of physics actions happening in the game are incurring huge performance penalties on Warzone 2 servers, which is making them struggle to run properly and could possibly be reducing the actual tick rate of the server as well, meaning in an overall performance degradation for things like gunfights, hit registration, moving behind cover, and pretty much everything in the game suffers as a result of poor performance on servers. So if you've been wondering why you've been crashing from servers, disconnecting, rubber banding, seeing extremely high latency, so on and so forth, this is why. Because the COD servers can't handle what they're currently doing, and because of skill-based matchmaking, they're going to prioritize having skill-based matchmaking over you having a good connection to the game. This could be resolved in the future with efficiency updates and solving technical debt with some of the processes happening in the game, making things like physics calculations, airstrikes, kill streaks, and artificial intelligence less demanding on the game server to make sure that things are running smoothly and possibly give them the performance overhead to increase the tick rate for the servers. But for now, things aren't looking great. Warzone 2 has now been out for quite a while, and server stability hasn't gotten any better. Hopefully you found this video interesting, folks, and hopefully it answers some questions about the Warzone 2 servers. Drop a like and subscribe if you want more in-depth dives on Warzone 2.